Duterte versus House of Representatives. Let it be clear, it was not this institution that violated the Constitution. On the contrary, the House adhered faithfully to its constitutional duty to initiate an impeachment following clearly laid down and prevailing jurisprudence. Sadly, our co-equal branches have failed not only the Constitution, but the Filipino people. Our message is simple. Under our watch, the House's exclusive power to initiate impeachment will not be diminished. This is a power enshrined in the very framework of our democracy, built upon the principles of checks and balances. Nilunod ng teknikalidad ang mga tunay na tanong. Nasaan ang confidential funds? Sino sina Mary Jane Piatos, Fernando Tempura, Carlos Miguel Owishi, Chippy McDonald, at ilan pang mga pangalan na tila ba ginawang chichirya ang pera ng bayan? Bakit may halos 2 bilyon na umikot na pera sa joint bank accounts ni na Vice President Sara Duterte at ng kanyang ama na si Rodrigo Duterte? Sa gitna ng krisis edukasyon, bakit may akusasyon na nilalaro pa ang procurement ng Department of Education at ang kinabukasan ng ating mga kabataan? Tama ba ang pagbabantang ipapatay ang ating Pangulo, ang First Lady, at ang ating mismong Speaker of the House? Dear colleagues, these issues caught beyond partisan lines or personal ambition. They strike at the very heart of the principle that public office is a public trust. All public officials must be accountable to the people. When the House filed the impeachment complaint, it did so out of duty. It was not a power play, as some claim, but an exercise of its mandate to seek the truth and demand answers the Vice President never gave. Hanggang ngayon, walang sagot sa mga isyong ito. Yet in return, the House has been met with insults and accusations and a narrative reducing the solemn constitutional duty to mere politics. Today, I rise to set the record straight and call out these falsehoods. Nagkamali? Ilaw na sinaing daw na minadali ang pagkaluto? With due respect, this is patently false for the soundbite that it is. This House followed every constitutional requirement, guided by Supreme Court precedents in Francisco versus House and Gutierrez versus House in crafting and timing this impeachment. Una, sinunod natin ang one-year bar rule sa pag-file ng impeachment complaint. There can be no application of the one-year bar rule because what the Supreme Court identified as a trigger, the so-called termination or archival of the other 3 impeachment complaints, happened after the House had already acted on the 4th complaint by transmitting the same to the Senate in accordance with Article 11, Section 3, subparagraph 4 of the Constitution. Ito ang pinaka-technical sa desisyon ng Korte Suprema. Para nitong pinilit palabasin ng 3 complaints na inihain sa first mode, actually it's supposed to be first and second modes, ay nagsilbing hadlang sa articles of impeachment na inihain ng kapulungang ito gamit ang second mode na 1/3 vote. Actually, it's supposed to be third mode. But to be consistent with the Supreme Court ruling and also the motion for reconsideration of the Sol Gen or the Office of the Solicitor General, I shall also refer to it as the second mode. Pero ang hilaw dito ay hindi ang articles of impeachment, kundi ang paliwanag ng Korte Suprema. Sabi nga ng Sol Gen sa ating motion for reconsideration, ang articles of impeachment na inihain ng House gamit ang second mode o sa katunayan third mode, ang siyang humadlang sa 3 iba pang complaint. Binaliktad ng Korte Suprema ang totoong nangyari. Mr. Speaker, I respectfully but firmly submit the one-year bar rule has been abused and twisted in this instance to frustrate accountability for the highest officials of the land. The rule should be read and interpreted strictly in favor of accountability. It cannot be weaponized to make impeachment even harder. Napakahirap na nga ng proseso, lalo pang pinahirapan. Impeachable officials already stand as a class of their own, over and above all other government officials. Sobra na yata kung bibigyan pa ng special protection sa impeachment ang mga special officials na ito. Ano ang special treatment na binigay kay VP Sara Duterte? Gumawa sila ng mga bagong rules sa kalagitnaan ng laro para pigilan ang trial. May paghingi pa ng certification ng Senado na walang violation ang House sa one-year bar rule. May dagdag pa mula sa Korte Suprema na dapat may hearing pa rin sa second mode ng impeachment. Kumbaga sa basketball, panayang tawag ng foul sa atin ng referee kahit wala namang physical contact. Kada free throw natin, palayo ng palayo ang free throw line at pahirap makashoot. Parang ang lakas ng kalaban sa mga referee. Sa larong ito, hindi yata bilog ang bola. Masama bang itanong pagkatapos nating lumaro ng patas kung natalo ba talaga tayo o nadaya tayo? Pangalawa, malinaw na nagkamali po ang Korte Suprema, with all due respect to them, nang sabihin na hindi pinagbotohan sa plenary ang transmittal ng impeachment complaint. A plenary session was actually conducted where members of the House voted to immediately endorse the fourth impeachment complaint and transmit it to the Senate. Mismong House Journal ang nagpatunay dito at hindi lamang isang news report na tanging pinagbatayan ng Supreme Court. Simple lang po ang tinuro sa atin sa law school, sa rules of evidence, mas matimbang official government records kaysa sa news report. Ang una ay tinuturing na authentic at primary documentary evidence, ang pangalawa ay secondary source. So kung may conflict, yung primary document ang susundin natin. Let me stress the consequence. The highest court of the land, without even allowing the House to fully present its case through oral arguments and perhaps submission of memoranda, anchored a unanimous decision on second-hand views while brushing aside the official journal of a co-equal branch. Had the honorable justices bothered to take a look at the House Journal of February 5, 2025, which apparently it has done so on other occasions of transcendental importance, they would have seen that the House voted to transmit the articles of impeachment with overwhelming support, 215 votes, and that the earlier complaints were archived only as a formality after the fourth complaint has already been elevated. Yet the court's ruling, citing a mere news report, painted a false picture that the House rushed a new complaint despite pending ones, a narrative that flatly contradicts reality. Pangatlo, hindi nga manghuhula ang mga House members para malaman na noong February 5, babaguhin at dadagdagan pala ng Supreme Court pagdating ng July 25 ang ibig sabihin ng initiation na naiba sa mga dating desisyon nito sa Francisco versus HOR at Gutierrez versus HOR. Hindi natin kayang mag-time travel para sabihin sa mga congressmen noong February 5 na kailangan nilang sundin ang mga magiging bagong interpretasyon ng Supreme Court sa salitang initiation halos kalahating taon bago pa man ito maimbento at maisulat noong July 25. The principle of prospectivity applies not only to original or amendatory statutes and administrative rulings and circulars, but also to judicial decisions. When an old doctrine is overruled or, in the case of the Duterte case, substantially modified, the new doctrine should be applied prospectively and should not apply to those who relied on the old doctrine in good faith. Hindi lang po ako ang nagsabi niyan. Kung hindi ang Supreme Court sa Columbia Pictures versus Court of Appeals. Nangaabuso ba tayo kung hilingin natin sa Korte Suprema na sa pagkakataong ito, nasundin rin sana nila ang sarili nilang desisyon sa doktrina ng prospectivity? Palagay ko hindi po naman. Pang-apat, at ang pinakamahalaga sa lahat, katulad po ng sinabi ng ating minority leader kahapon, nagkaroon ng judicial amendment of the Constitution. Ang pag-amyenda sa Constitution ay huling ginawa ng Korte Suprema sa kaso ng Republic versus Sereno. Sa kasong ito, inalis sa pwesto bilang Chief Justice si Maria Lourdes Sereno sa pamamagitan ng quo warranto, taliwas sa utos ng konstitusyon na ang mga miyembro ng Korte Suprema ay pwede lamang tanggalin sa pamamagitan ng impeachment. Duterte versus HOR is the second amendment of the Constitution by the Supreme Court since the Sereno case. Article 11, Section 3, Paragraph 4 of the Constitution does not contain additional requirements regarding the drafting of the complaint, the manner of its circulation, or the conduct of any hearing or presentation of evidence before filing. These details, I respectfully submit, are outside of constitutional parameters and are best left to the rules on impeachment promulgated by the House. If the Supreme Court's decision remains undisturbed, there will now be two new subsections under Article 11, Section 3, Subparagraph 4 of the 1987 Constitution, as amended by the Supreme Court in Duterte. Aside from the requirement that it must be filed by 1/3 of the members of the House before transmittal to the Senate, the articles of impeachment must now be furnished first to the official being impeached in its draft form to give her the opportunity to respond. Thereafter, the articles of impeachment still in its draft form and the impeachable official's response should be furnished to all the members of the House for deliberation before voting on the same. These are now, seemingly, the new subsections of Article 11, Section 3, Subparagraph 4 of the 1987 Constitution, as amended by the Court in Duterte, if not reversed. Unlike amendments properly made under Article 17 of the Constitution on amendments and revisions, these amendments made by the Supreme Court are not subject to a plebiscite. These two new subsections are also problematic, not only because they are unconstitutional amendments to Article 11, Section 3, Subparagraph 4, but they are also problematic in substance. A draft articles of impeachment without any signature of any House member or congressional official cannot be treated as an official document. It might not be any better than a mere scrap of paper. Now, why would an impeachable official respond to an unsigned draft? And by what power is she or he compelled to do so when, for all intents and purposes, it is entirely possible that not a single congressman or congresswoman will even sign it. What is the legal status of the draft articles of impeachment at that point, before it is even signed by a single House member? Is it an official scrap of paper? Will the Supreme Court now add another amendment requiring the House Secretary General or the Speaker of the House to attest to and verify the unsigned draft articles as an official document of the House? If the Speaker attests to it, does that lone signature amount to endorsement? Can any single House member sign and therefore make it official enough to trigger the impeachable official's obligation to respond? Have we not just come full circle to the first mode of impeachment, effectively repealing the second mode or the third mode in its entirety from the 1987 Constitution? And if the draft is later changed in plenary after the official filed a response, must he or she respond again and again for every new version? If not given the chance to respond to a modified second, third, or fourth draft, whatever, would that not be another so-called violation of the right to due process? Mr. Speaker, the questions are endless. This is the danger with judicial amendments to the 1987 Constitution. At hindi po tayo nag-iisa sa mga obserbasyong ito. Former COMELEC Chair Christian Monsod, one of the framers of the 1987 Constitution, noted that the court, quote, imposed retroactively new requirements that were never part of past impeachment precedents, end of quote, such as a plenary hearing before referral to committee and giving the respondent a chance to be heard at the House even before we transmit the case to the Senate. As he put it, if there is a violation of due process, it is when one is required to comply with a rule that did not exist at the time of the act. Retired Chief Justice Renato Puno, speaking for the Philippine Constitutional Association, or PhilConsa, voiced grave concern over this judicial intrusion. PhilConsa warned that requiring the House to certify compliance with a one-year ban, a requirement found nowhere in the Constitution, encroaches on the House's sole prerogative under Article 11, Section 3. Quote, to create such a requirement, according to C.J. Puno, to create such a requirement ex post facto undermines both the separation of powers and the rule of law, end of quote. Once the Senate has received the articles of impeachment in February 5, it has validly acquired jurisdiction, and that jurisdiction cannot be lost or suspended by mere procedural acts, such as the lack of a House certification. Retired Senior Associate Justice Antonio Carpio also noted that the court relied on a media report instead of official records of the House. Indeed, ABS-CBN News itself has clarified that a news item the Supreme Court cited were misinterpreted, and did not reflect the official House Journal of Proceedings. Retired Justice and 1986 Constitutional Commission member Adolf Ascuna said it best, quote, the Constitution does not say there has to be a hearing. The Supreme Court now says there has to be a hearing. That is rewriting the Constitution, not just the rules. The Supreme Court is saying the Constitution is unconstitutional, end of quote. Hindi po palpak ang Kamara at lalong hindi ito sunod-sunuran sa ambisyon ng iilan. We will not allow our duty to hold a high official accountable for grave violations of law and public trust to be twisted by cheap analogies about undercooked rice. Kung merong hilaw dito, ito ang mga paliwanag ni VP Inday Sara sa mga isyung kinakaharap niya. Bakit ba takot na takot siyang harapin ang impeachment trial kung malinis ang kanyang konsensya? Perhaps more than anyone, I know that the innocent can look their accusers in the eye and say that the evidence is false, if not a total sham. Let me be equally clear. The House of Representatives, a co-equal branch of government, was fulfilling its duty in exercising its constituent powers that even the Supreme Court cannot just take away. Hindi pwedeng basta ipawalang bisa ng Korte Suprema ang kapangyarihang ipinagkaloob ng saligang batas sa Kamara, lalo na kung maling batayan ng ginamit nito. The separation of powers is like a finely tuned scale, each branch bearing its own weight so that the Republic stands upright. When one branch acts in a way that shifts that weight, it must move with the precision of a surgeon, not the force of a sledgehammer. To do otherwise is to risk toppling the balance entirely, leaving our people with a government where one power overshadows the rest and the promise of checks and balances becomes nothing more than a faded inscription in a dusty law book. Long-established principles on judicial restraint and separation of powers have been cast aside. In Duterte, the Supreme Court painted in broad strokes, ignoring the boundaries of competence and authority it once acknowledged in Imbong versus Ochoa, GR number 204819, April 8, 2014.